The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the sprawling fields of the farm. The sound of chirping birds and the gentle rustling of leaves created a peaceful soundtrack as the protagonist, Alex, moved about the property. It was the kind of day that could lull anyone into a sense of tranquility, the kind where you could almost forget about the world beyond the farm's borders. Alex was a man of few words, someone who preferred the company of animals to people. The farm was his sanctuary, a place where he could work the land in peace and solitude. Alex had spent years cultivating this slice of rural heaven. The soil was rich, the animals healthy, and the rhythm of farm life was a comforting constant. He'd built this place from the ground up, taking pride in every corner, every fence post, every barn. There was a quiet satisfaction in the work, a sense of purpose that filled his days. But today, as he worked near the barn, his thoughts kept drifting, interrupted by an uneasy feeling he couldn't quite shake. It wasn't the weather that bothered him. It was something else, a vague tension in the air that seemed to hang over the farm like an invisible storm cloud. As he adjusted the pitchfork in his hands, his gaze shifted towards the edge of his property. That's when he saw her, Karen. She was standing by the fence that separated their two properties, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, watching him. Alex had known Karen for years, though known was a loose term. She was a neighbor, but not one he had much in common with. Karen, a woman in her late 50s, had a way of sticking her nose into other people's business, always looking for something to criticize. She was one of those people who believed the world should bend to her will, and that included the entire neighborhood. Over the years, Alex had learned to ignore her, keeping his distance and avoiding confrontation. But Karen's presence on the fence line day after day had become a nuisance. It started small, comments about the noise of the cows, the scent of manure in the air, the way the farm looked in the mornings. But it had slowly escalated, the complaints growing louder and more unreasonable. Alex knew that she didn't like him, didn't like the way he ran his farm, and most certainly didn't like the fact that he had the audacity to be successful while she seemed to be stuck in a never-ending loop of dissatisfaction. It wasn't just her constant presence on the edge of the property that set him on edge. It was the sense that she was watching, waiting for an opportunity to stir up trouble. And trouble was something Karen excelled at. She had the uncanny ability to take the smallest issue and blow it out of proportion, turning molehills into mountains. Alex had a feeling, a gut instinct, that today wouldn't be any different. As the afternoon wore on, he caught her eye once, again. Her gaze was piercing, like she was calculating something. Alex sighed, shaking his head. "Here we go again," he muttered to himself, rolling up his sleeves and returning to his work. Little did he know, Karen was about to take things to a whole new level. What had been a quiet, routine day was about to spiral into chaos. The storm wasn't just in the air. It was brewing right on the horizon, and it was Karen who was about to set it in motion. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. It was around mid-afternoon when the call came in. Alex was just finishing up some repairs on the barn, wiping sweat from his brow, and feeling the familiar weariness of a day's work. The hum of the tractor's engine had quieted down, replaced now by the sounds of crickets beginning their evening chorus. It should have been a peaceful moment, but the tension that had been creeping in over the past few days now seemed to have a life of its own. Karen had been standing by the fence again, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She'd been watching him, but this time, something about her posture was different. She looked more intense. There was a look in her eyes that Alex knew all too well, a mix of frustration, suspicion, and a touch of that all-too-familiar self-righteousness that seemed to define her every move. He didn't think much of it at first. After all, it was Karen. She was always finding something to gripe about. But then his phone rang. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but something about the urgency in the ringtone made his heart skip a beat. "Hello?" he answered, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Is this Alex Harmon?" The voice on the other end was sharp, professional, but there was a tinge of disbelief, like they weren't sure if they should be taking him seriously. "Yes, this is Alex. Who's this?" "This is Deputy Hayes from the local sheriff's office. We've received a 911 call about illegal farming practices on your property. Specifically, we're being told you're dumping toxic chemicals near your livestock." Alex blinked. "What? That's not true. I don't know who told you that, but—" "Ma'am, Karen Roberts," the deputy interrupted. "She says she saw you spraying something on your crops that could be harmful. We need to check it out." Alex's hand tightened around the phone. He had to take a deep breath to stay calm. Karen. Of course, it was her. His stomach turned as he imagined the nonsense she must have been feeding to the authorities. "Deputy, I assure you there's nothing harmful going on here," Alex said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I use all natural fertilizers. I've got organic certification on the farm. I've been doing this for years. There's nothing toxic happening here." "Understood. But we'll be sending someone to investigate. Stay by the phone, please." Alex hung up, his mind racing. He knew exactly what had happened. Karen had been complaining about his farm for months, trying to push him to move his operations somewhere else. She didn't like the noise, the smell, or the fact that his farm was thriving while hers was a crumbling mess of unkempt property. But accusing him of illegal activity? That was new, and beyond frustrating. As the minutes ticked by, Alex's mind couldn't help but replay the last few interactions with Karen. She had been getting more and more vocal, accusing him of all sorts of things, everything from ruining the neighborhood's aesthetic to wasting water. Today, it seemed, she'd found the perfect weapon to wield against him. The law. A sharp laugh escaped him as he shook his head. He couldn't help it. It was so absurd, yet somehow it made perfect sense. Karen had always been a master of turning the smallest issue into a major crisis. She had a way of twisting things to fit her narrative, and in her mind, she was always the victim, the one whose rights were being trampled. Alex, on the other hand, didn't get worked up easily. He knew better than to lose his temper over petty complaints, especially ones as baseless as these. But the idea of Karen going so far as to call the authorities, that stung. He had worked hard to build this farm, to make it a place of pride. And now here she was, trying to destroy that with a lie. With a sigh, Alex rubbed his temples, trying to shake off the frustration. He couldn't let this get to him. He had to stay calm. He'd dealt with difficult people before, and Karen was no different. He just had to handle this the right way. But as he stood there watching Karen retreat into her house, a new wave of determination settled over him. If Karen wanted to play this game, he was ready to make sure she lost. But for now he had to wait. And in the quiet of his farm, the calm before the storm felt like it was getting heavier by the minute. Karen's voice was shaky but determined as she spoke to the 911 dispatcher, her words coming out in a rush, a torrent of accusations that didn't quite line up with the reality of what was happening on the farm. "Hello. Yes. I need to report illegal activity on the Harmon farm. They're dumping chemicals. I saw them spraying something, God knows what, over the crops and near the animals. It's dangerous. It's toxic." The dispatcher on the other end of the line was trying to remain calm, though even through the phone, Karen's hysteria was palpable. "Ma'am, please calm down. Can you confirm exactly what you saw? What kind of chemicals are we talking about?" "I don't know. I don't know the specifics, but it's definitely not something you should be spraying. I've seen it before. Farmers like him always try to get away with things like this, and now it's happening right next door. The cows are going to get sick, and I'm sure it's going to affect the entire neighborhood. You've got to send someone right away." Karen's voice was sharp, cutting through the dispatcher's attempts at soothing her. The dispatcher, clearly trained to handle hysterical callers, maintained a professional tone, but the weight of Karen's words was beginning to take shape. "All right, ma'am, we'll send someone to investigate. Please stay on the line, and we'll make sure this gets handled." Thank you." Karen's voice crackled with false gratitude, though her underlying satisfaction was unmistakable. "I'll be right here. I don't trust him at all. He's hiding something." The call ended, but the damage had already been done. The authorities, now officially alerted, would be making their way to the farm shortly. And while Alex remained blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing in the background, Karen was already standing by her window, watching the world unfold. She couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction at the thought of someone else finally taking action. Someone who would see her side of the story. Someone who wouldn't just dismiss her as the annoying neighbor. Karen had always prided herself on getting things done. She'd long seen herself as a sort of unofficial enforcer in the neighborhood, always quick to point out what others were doing wrong. And now, for the first time, she had a real weapon to wield, something with actual consequences. The authorities would show up, and they would take her seriously. After all, what did she know about farming? Certainly not as much as Alex, who'd been running the farm for years. But that didn't matter. She knew something wasn't right. And today, she'd make sure everyone else saw it too. As the minutes ticked by, Alex went about his work with the same steady rhythm, unaware that the entire tone of his day had shifted. He was inspecting the barn door when the unmistakable sound of a siren broke through the air, sharp and jarring against the stillness. His heart skipped a beat, and a brief feeling of dread settled in his chest. Was it really happening? Sure enough, moments later, a police car pulled up at the end of his driveway, its lights flashing but the siren now silenced. Alex stood frozen for a moment, confusion mixing with a touch of annoyance. He wiped his hands on his jeans before walking toward the officers with a calm that barely masked the suspicion gnawing at him. What was going on? He hadn't done anything wrong. As the officer stepped out of the car, Alex tried to gauge the situation. But before he could open his mouth to greet them, he heard a voice from across the yard. "You." It was Karen, stepping out of her front door, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her expression a mixture of self-righteousness and smug satisfaction. "You're in big trouble now, Alex. I told them what you've been doing." Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. This was it. He could already feel the frustration building. The deputy's confused glance shot toward Karen before shifting back to Alex, as if waiting for some explanation. And that's when the twist hit him, the moment he least expected. The deputy's next words weren't what Alex was expecting, but they made the reality of the situation sink in. "Sir, are you aware that we've received reports of illegal chemical usage on your property?" Alex's stomach dropped. The same story? The same accusations that Karen had been peddling? But what struck him wasn't just the ridiculousness of the claim. It was the realization that, despite his calm, despite his years of work building this farm with integrity, he was about to be dragged into the chaos she had manufactured. At that moment, a strange calmness washed over him. He knew exactly how to handle this, but Karen wouldn't be expecting what was about to come next. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway was unmistakable, and Alex felt a brief wave of annoyance wash over him. He looked up from his work as the police car pulled to a stop, its flashing lights casting an eerie glow over the otherwise quiet farm. The officer behind the wheel was a man in his early 40s, his expression unreadable as he got out of the car and approached, clipboard in hand. The officer was followed by another deputy, a younger woman, who had the kind of posture that suggested she was new to this whole investigating thing, but she was clearly trying to look the part. Before either officer could speak, Karen was already at the edge of her property, her arms waving in the air like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of chaos. "There he is!" she shouted, pointing directly at Alex. "That's the one I've been telling you about. He's poisoning the land. I told you. I told you all along that something wasn't right." Alex stood there, the image of calm, wiping his hands on his jeans as he prepared for whatever would come next. He had an uncanny ability to remain composed in the face of absurdity, and this moment was no different. His mind worked quickly, sorting through the possible outcomes, but his outward appearance never wavered. He simply couldn't afford to lose his temper, no matter how ridiculous the situation had become. The deputies exchanged a glance before the older officer addressed him. "Sir, is it Alex Harmon?" he asked, his voice calm but firm, clearly trying to make sense of the situation. "That's right," Alex replied, his voice steady, with just the slightest hint of curiosity. "What's this about?" "Well," the officer started, looking at Karen for confirmation. "We've received reports of illegal chemical use on your property. We're just here to check things out." "Illegal chemicals?" Alex repeated, arching an eyebrow. "I think someone's been misinformed." Karen jumped in before Alex could say anything else, her voice dripping with self-satisfaction. "I saw him. I saw him spraying those chemicals. Who knows what they were? It was right over there, by the field. And I'm telling you, it's bad news. All my plants have been dying ever since his farm started up. What he's doing is dangerous. The whole neighborhood is at risk." The younger deputy glanced at the older officer, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "Did you actually see these chemicals being sprayed?" she asked, her voice betraying just a hint of skepticism, though she was still trying to maintain the formal tone of the situation. "I saw it with my own eyes." Karen's voice rose in pitch, frantic energy spilling over. "He's poisoning everything. I've been telling him for months, that something wasn't right with the way he runs things. But no one listens to me." The older officer raised a hand to silence her, his eyes narrowing slightly as he focused on Alex. "So you've been spraying chemicals on your crops, Mr. Harmon?" Alex shook his head, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I don't know what Karen's talking about, but I can assure you there's nothing toxic going on here. I use all natural fertilizers, nothing harmful to the environment. I've even got organic certification to prove it," Karen scoffed loudly. "Organic certification? Please, he's hiding behind that. You don't need to be a genius to see. Something's off." The deputies exchanged another look, their expressions growing more conflicted. The younger deputy took a step forward, her gaze flickering between Alex and the increasingly hysterical Karen. "Ma'am, can you explain exactly what you saw? I mean, do you have any proof? Like photos or samples?" Karen's eyes flashed. "I don't need proof when it's right in front of me. Look around you. Everything's dying. I've lived here longer than he has. I know what I saw." Alex could feel the tension rising. He understood how this situation could look from the outside. A concerned neighbor raising alarms about something potentially harmful. But he wasn't about to let his farm be dragged through the mud over baseless claims. His calm demeanor wasn't just for show. It was his way of taking control of the narrative. If he lost his cool, Karen would win. And that was the last thing he was going to let happen. He took a step forward, locking eyes with the officers. "Listen, I'm happy to let you inspect the property, but I've got nothing to hide. I don't appreciate being accused of something I didn't do, especially when I've worked so hard to build this farm the right way." The younger deputy hesitated, looking over at her partner for guidance. The older officer seemed to think it over, his expression unreadable. Finally, he gave a short nod. "All right, Mr. Harmon," he said, his voice surprisingly neutral, as if he'd been through this kind of situation before. "We'll take a look around. But if we find anything—" Alex nodded, his voice unwavering. "You won't." As the deputies began to move toward the fields, Karen's frantic energy hadn't dissipated. She stood there, arms still crossed, eyes darting between Alex and the officers, convinced that her word would win out. But Alex wasn't worried. The truth had a way of coming to light. and he was about to make sure the authorities saw things the right way. With each step the officers took, the tension between Karen's accusations and Alex's calm resolve seemed to stretch thin, like a taut rope ready to snap. Only one thing was certain now: the calm before the storm was over. The officers began their walk toward the fields, their eyes scanning the area with the practiced vigilance of those who had seen it all before. Alex watched them, his mind racing with the calculated calm he had mastered over the years. Karen hovered nearby, still fuming, still certain she'd won. The younger deputy muttered something to her partner about checking the barn first. But Alex knew where this was going. Karen's accusations would fall apart the moment they started looking for any evidence of wrongdoings. It was just a matter of time. But then, without warning, Alex did something that made everyone stop in their tracks. With a deep breath, he straightened up and cleared his throat. His calmness cut through the tension like a hot knife through butter. "Before you go any further," he said, his voice low and steady but carrying the weight of someone who had just made a decision that would change everything, "I think it's time I tell you who I really am." The officers froze. Karen, too, fell silent, the air between them suddenly thick with uncertainty. The younger deputy, who had been scanning the crops, turned her head toward Alex. She looked at him with curiosity, her expression unreadable. The older officer paused, brow furrowing, obviously unsure of what to make of this sudden shift in the conversation. Alex could feel the eyes of everyone on him, Karen's gaze filled with suspicion, the deputy's filled with confusion, and he let the silence stretch, just long enough to build a sense of anticipation. He glanced at the officers, then back to Karen, before slowly reaching into his jacket pocket. Karen's eyes flickered with unease as she saw his movement. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice snapping with a mixture of irritation and a growing fear she didn't want to acknowledge. Alex didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly pulled out his badge and held it up for them to see. It glinted under the afternoon sun, its familiar star-shaped emblem unmistakable. The deputies stared at it, their faces transforming from skepticism to shock in the span of a few seconds. The older officer's mouth opened slightly, as if trying to comprehend what he was seeing, but no words came out. The younger deputy's eyes widened, her gaze shifting between the badge and Alex's calm demeanor, and she took a step back as though she had been struck by something unexpected. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. You're the sheriff?" the younger deputy asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she was still trying to process the revelation. Alex nodded slowly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Yes, I'm Sheriff Alex Harmon." Karen's face, which had been so self-assured just moments before, fell into utter confusion. Her arms, which had been crossed in a triumphant posture, slowly lowered to her sides. The smug confidence that had once defined her expression evaporated in an instant, replaced by something much less certain: disbelief. She looked from Alex to the deputies, her mouth opening and closing as though trying to find words that would make sense of the situation. But the truth, as stark as it was inescapable now. I don't understand," Karen stammered, her voice trembling for the first time. You're the sheriff? But you've been... I thought you were just a farmer. Why didn't you tell me?" Alex chuckled softly at her flustered state. "You never asked. And frankly, I don't go around advertising my job. Not everyone needs to know." The older officer looked between Karen and Alex, his jaw slightly slack. It was clear that he was still processing the information, but he was beginning to see the picture unfolding. He turned to his younger deputy and muttered something under his breath, probably trying to figure out what steps to take next. But the truth was clear. They had been duped. Karen's confusion only deepened as she finally spoke again, her voice shaking now. "But I called 911. You're supposed to help people like me. You're supposed to listen to me." She gestured, wildly toward the officers. "I thought you were supposed to take this seriously." Alex's gaze didn't waver. "I am taking this seriously. But you should have done your homework, Karen. Maybe you wouldn't have made such a mess of things, if you had." The younger deputy was the first to recover from the shock. She shot a quick, awkward glance at her partner before stepping forward. "Sheriff, well, this is certainly unexpected." Her voice was tentative, as though she was still grappling with the new dynamic that had just been revealed. "Unexpected is one way to put it," Alex said with a wry grin. "But I'll tell you what, deputy." He leaned in slightly, the change in his posture subtle but commanding. "I think you'll find I know the law a little better than most. And what Karen's been claiming? Well, that's nothing but a wild accusation." Karen stood still, her face pale, her mouth agape, as if she had just witnessed something she couldn't comprehend. She had clearly underestimated the man she'd been so eager to bring down. The truth was a bitter pill for her to swallow, and the shock was written all over her face. She'd been playing a dangerous game, but now she was the one who had lost. As the silence hung in the air, the younger deputy spoke again, her voice steadier now. "Sheriff, we'll follow up, of course, but it seems like Karen's claims are, well, unfounded." Alex nodded, his expression unreadable. "That's right. I'll make sure we get everything straightened out. As for Karen," he glanced at her, his voice firm but not unkind, "I'd suggest you think long and hard about what kind of accusations you're making before you drag people's names through the mud." Karen's face twisted into something almost resembling anger, but she didn't say a word. She couldn't. Not now. As the deputies took one last look around, confirming what Alex had already known, that there was nothing illegal happening on his farm, he felt the weight of the moment settle over him. He had managed to turn the tables, and for once Karen's game had backfired spectacularly, but it wasn't just that she'd lost. It was that, in the end, she had underestimated who she was up against, and that would be her greatest mistake. Karen stood frozen, her eyes flickering between Alex's sheriff's badge and the officers who had just been thrown into the middle of her mess. For a moment there was a long, tense silence. Alex could almost hear the gears turning in her mind as she scrambled to regain control of the situation. But instead of acknowledging the truth of what had just been revealed, Karen's face twisted into a mask of stubborn defiance. This doesn't change anything," she sputtered, her voice sharp and shrill. "You're still poisoning the land. Just because you're the sheriff doesn't mean you can hide the truth. I've seen it with my own eyes. All these chemicals. What are they really doing to the environment? To the community?" Alex didn't flinch. He had known this was coming. He had expected her to dig in her heels, to double down on her accusations, even in the face of undeniable facts. He had seen it countless times before. People like Karen weren't interested in truth. They were interested in winning, no matter the cost. The younger deputy, who had been nervously shifting from one foot to the other, now glanced between Karen and Alex, unsure of how to proceed. The older officer seemed even more uncomfortable, but he said nothing. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife, and all eyes were on Karen as she stubbornly clung to her narrative. "You can't just sweep this under the rug." Karen's voice rose, her hands trembling as she pointed at Alex, then at the deputies. "This farm is a disaster waiting to happen. I'm not going to stand by and let him get away with it just because he's wearing a badge. He's got something to hide. Just wait, you'll see." Alex's gaze never wavered. He had been in situations like this before, and he knew how to handle people who refused to accept reality. His voice, when it came, was calm, almost too calm, like he was speaking to a child who was throwing a tantrum. "Karen," he said, his tone measured, "you've made your point, but there's nothing to back up your claims. You don't get to just decide what's true because you don't like the facts." Karen's face flushed with anger. The color in her cheeks deepened, and her chest heaved with each breath, her frustration palpable. She was used to getting her way, to controlling. The narrative, and Alex had just shattered that illusion. But she wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. "I don't care about your facts," Karen snapped, her voice rising to a pitch that made the younger deputy visibly flinch. "I've been living here for years, and I've seen what's going on. You think you can just pull some badge out and make everything go away? That's not how this works," Alex raised an eyebrow. "Actually, that's exactly how this works, Karen. You've been making accusations without any proof. And now you're standing in front of me trying to turn this into something it's not. The authorities are here, and they're not going to let you spin this any further." The older deputy, who had been watching the exchange with growing discomfort, cleared his throat and took a step forward. "Ma'am," he said slowly, his voice tentative but firm, "I think it's time to let this go. We've inspected the property, and there's no evidence to support your claims. Sheriff Harmon's farm is operating within the law." Karen's jaw clenched, but she didn't back down. "You're wrong," she said, her voice almost a whisper now, full of venom. "You're all wrong. You're just covering for him because he's one of you." The younger deputy opened her mouth to protest, but the older officer raised a hand to silence her. He knew this conversation was going nowhere, and he knew it was time to wrap things up. "Karen, if you don't have anything more to add, I think we're done here." Alex nodded in agreement, his expression one of cool detachment. He could sense that Karen was reaching the end of her rope, and the desperation in her eyes only made the situation more absurd. She had been so certain of her victory, so sure that her accusations would hold up, but now she was floundering, her words losing any real power. But Karen wasn't quite finished yet. She took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing as she glared at Alex. "You think this is over?" she spat. "I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. You can't hide behind that badge forever." Alex chuckled, a low, knowing sound that didn't reach his eyes. "I don't need to hide behind anything. Karen, you just showed everyone exactly who you are. The truth is already out. You can't unlose this battle." Karen took a step back, her entire body shaking with the effort to suppress her anger. But she knew, deep down she knew, that this was over. She had made a fool of herself, and there was no coming back from it. Alex had expertly turned the tables on her, and now the only thing she could do was stand there and seethe. The younger deputy stepped forward, her voice gentle but final. "Ma'am, I think you should go home. You've made your accusations, but we've done our job. There's nothing more to discuss here." With that, Karen's facade cracked completely. She turned on her heel, her face red with rage, and stormed off, muttering under her breath about how unfair everything was. But as she walked away, Alex couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet satisfaction. He had remained calm, controlled, and, most importantly, he had kept his ground. He wasn't just the sheriff. He was someone who knew how to handle people like Karen, and that had made all the difference. As the officers prepared to leave, the tension that had held the farm in its grip slowly began to lift. Karen's attempts to escalate had only revealed her true nature. And as for Alex, he knew this would be a story he'd be telling for a long time. As the officers continued to stand by, Karen's earlier bravado began to crumble under the weight of her lies. She had blustered and ranted, accused and exaggerated, but now the truth was becoming painfully clear to everyone involved. The once confident woman, who had seemed so sure of her right to police Alex's farm, was now a shell of that certainty. Her eyes darted nervously between the two deputies, as if looking for some shred of validation that simply wasn't there anymore. The older deputy, who had been quiet for most of the encounter, now stepped forward with a firm expression. "Ma'am," he began, his voice as steady as Alex's, "we've thoroughly checked your claims. There's no evidence of anything illegal going on here. And frankly, we're starting to question why you felt the need to make such baseless accusations in the first place." Karen's face tightened, but she didn't speak. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and she glanced at Alex, who was standing just behind the officers, arms crossed, looking as though he were waiting for the inevitable unraveling of her story. "You're accusing someone of crimes that don't exist," the deputy continued, his voice cold. "And that's something we don't take lightly. You've wasted our time, and now you've dragged the sheriff into this mess. You're going to have to answer for that." The younger deputy, who had been shifting uneasily the entire time, added, "Ma'am, making false claims like this can lead to charges. You might want to think about how you want to proceed." Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red, her throat constricting as she fought to keep control. She opened her mouth as though to argue, to explain herself once again, but the words caught in her throat. Her earlier defiance was fading quickly, replaced by the unmistakable sting of humiliation. Her eyes flickered, darting from the deputies to Alex, and she suddenly seemed much smaller, her posture hunched, her shoulders sagging. "You can't do this to me," Karen muttered, her voice trembling now. "I was just trying to help. I was trying to keep this place safe." "By spreading lies," Alex's voice rang out sharply, cutting through her pitiful excuses. "By accusing me of things you knew were false? That's not helping, Karen. That's just making trouble for people who don't deserve it." Karen opened her mouth, again her face twisting as if she were searching for the right words. But nothing came out. She had dug herself into a hole, and no matter how much she tried to claw her way back out, she couldn't seem to find any ground beneath her feet. "You've been a nuisance to this community for far too long," Alex continued, his tone calm, but filled with authority. "And now you're going to face the consequences. This isn't just about my farm anymore. It's about the damage you've done to your own credibility." For the first time, Karen seemed to realize the full extent of what she had done. She wasn't just losing a petty argument. She was on the verge of being held accountable for something much larger. The realization settled over her like a heavy blanket, suffocating her pride and leaving her with nothing but her own mistakes. The older deputy gave her one last look, his expression a mix of disappointment and resignation. "We're going to file a report. We'll let you know what the next steps are. But I strongly suggest you start thinking about how you can make things right." Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She was defeated, and there was no way to spin her way out of this one. Her eyes, once filled with fiery determination, were now wide with shock and embarrassment. She had thought that her accusations would win her allies, that her righteous indignation would carry the day. Instead, she found herself standing alone, exposed and humiliated. Alex stepped forward, offering a final word of advice that only added to her sense of defeat. "This could have been avoided, Karen. But you chose to make a mess of things. And now you're the one who has to clean it up." There was no response, no fiery retort, no final attempt to salvage her dignity. Karen stood there, silently accepting her defeat, the weight of her actions pressing down on her. The deputies turned to leave, their presence still heavy in the air as they made their way toward the patrol cars. Alex watched them go, his face still calm, though a small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of his lips. This wasn't about showing off. It was about making sure the community knew that there were consequences for reckless actions, for petty, vindictive behavior. And today, Karen had learned that lesson the hard way. As the last of the police vehicles pulled away from the farm, the dust settling behind them, Karen stood alone at the edge of the driveway. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. The weight of everything she had done crashing down on her all at once. It had been a long, hard battle for her to get here, but it had taken only a few minutes for Alex to turn the tables and leave her utterly exposed. In the end, Karen had tried to tear down a man she had never truly understood, and in doing so, she had exposed not just her own flaws, but her complete lack of respect for the truth. And as Alex looked out at his farm, now peaceful once again, he couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of satisfaction. Sometimes, the truth was all it took to win. After the dust settled and the last of the police vehicles rolled away, the quiet of the farm returned, though something had undeniably shifted. Karen's outlandish accusations had, for a brief moment, disrupted the peace that Alex had so carefully cultivated. But now, as the sun began to set over the rolling hills, the farm seemed more serene than ever. It was as if the land itself had reclaimed its calm after the storm. Karen, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. The repercussions of her actions rippled through the neighborhood faster than she could have imagined. Word travels quickly in small towns, and in the weeks that followed, Karen became the subject of quiet conversations at the local diner, the post office, and even during casual chats over the fence. People who had once politely waved to her now avoided her gaze, and some even began to distance themselves, making sure not to be associated with the woman who had caused such a scene. It wasn't just that Karen had made a fool of herself in front of the authorities. It was that she had betrayed the trust of her community. The very people she had claimed to protect with her accusations now saw her for what she truly was, a woman willing to manipulate the truth to get her way. No amount of forced smiles or explanations could repair the damage she'd done to her reputation. She had crossed a line, and there was no easy way back from it. As for Alex, life on the farm resumed its usual rhythm. The cows still roamed the pastures, the chickens continued to lay their eggs, and the sun still rose each morning over the vast expanse of land he had worked so hard to make his own. He had a quiet satisfaction in knowing that justice had been served. But beyond that, he felt a renewed sense of appreciation for the simple life he had built for himself. He had always prided himself on staying out of drama and conflict, and yet fate had thrust him into a situation that had tested his patience, his resolve, and his sense of humor. And he had come out the other side stronger for it. But life had a way of throwing unexpected twists into the mix, and in Alex's case, it came in the form of a particularly humorous incident. A week after the confrontation with Karen, he received a letter in the mail. It was a formal request, an invitation, of all things from Karen herself. The letter was polite, almost too polite, and asked if Alex would consider meeting with her to discuss the events of the past few days. She had new information to share, and she was hoping for a chance to clear the air. Alex chuckled to himself when he read the letter. He could already imagine Karen trying to salvage whatever shreds of dignity she had left. But he didn't feel the need to engage. She had made her bed, and now she would have to lie in it. He decided to send back a simple response. "Thanks for the invitation, but I'm already comfortable with how things are." The irony wasn't lost on him. Karen had spent all that time and effort trying to tear him down, and in the end, it was she who had been left humiliated, with no one to blame but herself. And yet, here she was, trying to fix things by offering an olive branch. Alex couldn't help but find it a little amusing, though it also served as a reminder of just how fragile pride can be, and how easily it could be shattered when one's sense of superiority was based on lies and half-truths. The lesson that had come from this whole ordeal was clear, and it wasn't lost on Alex. He had learned not to underestimate the power of a calm demeanor in the face of chaos. In a world where people often rush to judgment and jump to conclusions, Alex had remained steadfast, knowing that sometimes all it took was the truth to set things right. And while Karen had learned a hard lesson in humility, Alex had been reminded that peace, while fragile, was something worth protecting. He'd fought to keep his farm, his life, and his reputation intact, and he'd done so with dignity. The whole situation had also served as a reminder of how dangerous it could be to misuse authority, or to wield it without understanding its full weight. Karen had tried to play judge and jury, but she had only shown how reckless and misguided such actions could be. Authority wasn't something to be taken lightly, and the consequences of misusing it could ripple out far beyond the immediate moment. As Alex looked out across his farm that evening, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for his land, for the life he had carved out for himself, and for the clarity that had come from facing an unexpected challenge. It had been a trying experience, but it had also reaffirmed something fundamental: that truth, when coupled with patience and wisdom, would always find a way to shine through. As for Karen, Alex had no doubt that she would find a way to move forward. She would have to, just like anyone else. But the lesson she had learned would stay with her, as it should. You couldn't just tear people down for the sake of your own pride or frustration. And in a world where people often rush to make accusations, it was always better to wait, to think, and to understand before pointing the finger. The final twist came in a small, unexpected way, one that would stick with Alex for a long time. A few weeks after the whole incident, he received a call from one of his neighbors, a longtime friend, who had recently run into Karen at the local market. Karen, it seemed, had tried to offer a sheepish apology, but it was the way she said it that made Alex laugh out loud. "I wasn't entirely wrong, you know," she had said, attempting to backpedal. "I mean, you are a bit of a mystery man." Alex could only chuckle at the irony. Karen had tried to take him down with wild accusations, only to end up realizing, maybe too late, that the mystery she had been so quick to criticize had, in fact, been the key to everything falling into place. And with that, Alex found himself smiling, knowing that sometimes the best way to win wasn't to fight back, but to simply let life reveal its own truths, one unexpected twist at a time. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the next part, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. See you in the next one. Your support means the world.